we'll go ahead and take a look at the trace. There's no need for comments because there's no print and there are no conditional statements. There are no loops either to evaluate. We can start with line number. And the precondition has nothing to say because we don't have a single global variable to deal with, which is great because that's the whole idea of using parameters as well as local variables, is to get rid of the necessity to use global variables. The only line that is outside of the definition of a subroutine is line 18, so we start with the execution of line 18. Line 18 doesn't do a whole lot. All it does is to invoke the subroutine called main, and since none of these subroutines return a value, that means we will use return line number instead of return info. You can use return info if you want to, but it will just be the line following the invoke statement. So there's really no need to go through all that trouble to use return info. Line 18 is the last line of the entire program, so the return line number is just going to be post. Nothing really important here, except we also have to set up the local variable x of main. Since it's a local variable, it starts with an unknown value. And that means I forgot one thing too, because I forgot to initialize x, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So let's go ahead and initialize x here. We'll say x has a value of, oh, doesn't matter, make it 4. We'll just call this 15a. So I don't have to change the line number of the rest of the program. Any questions at this point? Okay. After line 18, we have set up both of these columns. It is time to go into the subroutine. The subroutine main starts on line 15a. That's the first action line that has anything that we can actually execute. All it does is to initialize the local variable x to a value of 4. Nothing else. Then we go to line 16. Line 16 invokes the subroutine called relay. And every time we invoke a subroutine, we have to remember to allocate a column for the return line number. And because relay does not return a value, we just have to use return line number and indicate what is the line that is logically following the invoke statement on line 16. The line that is logically following line 16 is just line 17. So there's really not much to setting up the return line number in this case. What is more interesting is what are we going to do to specify parameter x as well as parameter y in relay. Relay has 2 parameters. One is passed by reference called x. The other one is passed by reference. It is called y. Okay, well, let's first allocate the columns first. X is passed by reference, which means the parameter itself is going to be a reference or an alias to the column that belongs to the original item. Okay, so in this case, the x on the left-hand side refers to the x of the main subroutine. The x on the right-hand side refers to the parameter that we are setting up, which is column E. In this case, x is a local variable of main. It is already living in column C. So that means parameter x, which is passed by reference, is going to be an alias of column C. Is that okay? Because this is a part of your homework assignment. It's alias. Yes.
And we can just use that exact AKA.
Yeah,
column.
Absolutely. Yep. It's an alias. In other words, it's just another name for column C. And then y is passed by value, which means it has its own value. It is not a reference to something else. In fact, if you look at the expression on the left of the right arrow, it is x plus 3. This x refers to the x of the main subroutine, which is on column C. Column C has a value of 4 already. 4 plus 3 is 7. As a result, parameter y of relay is going to have a value of 7. Do you guys still remember how a pass by value parameter relates to a local variable? The only difference is a by-val parameter starts with a value that is specified by an invoke statement. A local variable starts with an unknown value.
So why did you
because it is passed by value. Okay, so now we are in relay. The only line of relay that actually does anything useful is line 12. So we start with line 12. Line 12 is invoking swap, which means we have to specify the return line number first, and then we have to pass the parameters along. One is called x and the other one is called y. The return line number is easy to figure out because the invoke is on line 12, so the line following line 12 is line 13. In this case, both x and y are passed by reference. If you look into the definition of swap, x is passed by reference, so is y, and I forgot one thing because I forgot to allocate a column for the local variable t. And t is the easy one because it is a local variable. It always starts with an unknown value. So that makes it pretty easy to set up. The question now is, what do I put in x and what do I put in y? It seems like it is a chicken and egg problem because I'm using x to specify x, I'm using y to specify y, but it really is not a chicken and egg problem because the x on the left-hand side, once again, belongs to the subroutine that is invoking. So in this case, the x on the left-hand side refers to this x here, which is parameter x, which is also known as column C. So now the question is, if I'm passing a parameter passed to me by reference, also by reference to someone else, what am I passing? Am I just passing the reference along, or am I passing the reference to the reference? And the answer is, we talked about this a few times already, we're just passing the reference that was given to me so that this is the more efficient way of doing things. In other words, parameter x of swap is basically the same alias. It refers to column C. And then parameter y, I use y to specify y, but this y on the left-hand side refers to the y of relay, which is passed by value. Parameter y, which is passed by value, lives on column F. It is not a reference to somebody else, so that means parameter y to swap is going to be an alias of column F. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. And now we are in the subroutine swap. Now, once we're in the subroutine swap, it's just busy work. There's really nothing major going on here. The first thing is we make a copy of x and put it into T. X refers to column C. Column C now has a value of 4, and as a result, T ends up with a value of 4 on line 5. On line 6, we copy the value of y to x. Y refers to column F. Column F has a value of 7, and we're using that to update x. X is also known as column C, and as a result, column C is now updated to 7. And then we have line 7. Line 7 is just copying the value of t, which is my local variable, to y, which is passed by reference. T has a value of 4. Y refers to column F. Column F is now updated to a value of 4. Then we go to line 8, and at this point, we're just cleaning up everything. Line 8 is the end of the subroutine swap. We are going to deallocate all these columns, and then we continue execution based on the return line number. This tells me I have to continue execution on line 13, and that's going to be my next line to execute. On line 13, it is also the end of a subroutine, in this case, the end of subroutine relay, and I'm going to do the same thing. In this case, I deallocate the 3 columns that belongs to the invocation of relay. So these columns are now gone. And then according to this return line number, I have to go back to line 17. Line 17 is also the end of a subroutine. This is the end of the main subroutine. So I do exactly the same thing. I deallocate the columns, and then I use the return line number column to remind myself where I'm supposed to go next. In this case, it is post, which means I'm done with the entire trace. Are there any questions about this example? It is basically spelling out the answer to the homework assignment. Yep.
After switching the
Okay, can you refer to the row number of the trace?
After 13.
Okay, row 13, so this row here. Okay, let me just highlight that row because it's a whole lot easier when we know which slice of time we're talking about.
13, that's 8.
Sorry?
That's 8.
Are you talking about line 13 or row 13 of the trace? Because there are two things. One refers to the line number of the pseudocode, and the other one refers to the row number of the trace itself. The row number of the trace is referring to a slice of time when we execute the program. So that's why it is important to differentiate between the two. Okay, so you're talking about row 14 of the trace where we are executing line 13 of the pseudocode, which means we're at the end of a subroutine, we deallocate all the columns that we allocated earlier for that invocation. And you are correct. This for or this parameter y is gone at that time. In other words, the swap operation, the result of the swap operation is gone.
So it's the same happening on row 15.
Sorry?
On row 15 it's the same happening too.
On row 15 is the same thing. A local variable x that belongs to the main subroutine is also going to disappear. In other words, by the time we get to the end of the execution of the entire program, it has no side effects whatsoever that is observable because there are no global variables. Remember, if the program has no global variable, then there's no way you can state anything about the precondition or the post-condition because everything is going to be temporary if the entire program does not have any global variables. Okay, those are good questions. Good questions. Is that helping out with the homework assignment?
Well, yeah, that's
Yep.
basically the homework.
And it's also being recorded too, so that's going to be helpful too. I look at my eBay account, and it shows me nobody has watched, most of the clips. Like, zero, no views. I was kind of disappointed.
Because you do such a good job in person.
Well, I can only do such a good job in person when students are here in the class.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The Moodle notes help.
The
Moodle notes
Mhm.
help.
I'm also, changing it, updating everything to use the newer way so it's all consistent with what I do in the class now. Because I kind of change the way I teach this class, just ever so slightly every semester. But since the original notes was written several years ago, all the cumulative changes I have made over the years, become kind of significant, and that's why I have to rewrite the notes to reflect all that changes. Okay, any questions at this point about the homework? No questions? Now, if there are no questions about the homework, we're going to go back to return values because there's a whole lot more we can talk about in terms of the return values. So we'll go ahead and make sure we save this file one more time, and we go back and look at. Let's see. Did we work on the sample program on Monday? And I said we're almost done with it. The Fibonacci example. No, not with this class. Okay. So that must be my Tuesday, Thursday class. Okay, let's see what we did on Monday. 2 invokes on one line. Okay, look at the date. Okay, it doesn't tell me which one is the more recent one. Is it invoke in an invoke? Okay, let me just pop this up. Is that what we talked about last time?